Okay, my focus has been on the land that I live on, and that's what I'd like to talk to you today. I'm going to show you, these are examples of some of my artwork, but I'm not a traditional photographer. I layer photographs, I cut out what I don't want, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that process, but also show you where I live and why my work has become important to me. I live on the 39-mile stretch of the Missouri National Recreational River. Up here, some of you are familiar with Pickstown. I can look out right now and see the dam, Fort Randall Dam, and then down here is Niobrara. So this is the stretch that's unchannelized and with some sandbars in the middle. I live on 600 acres here, but I grew up in Chicago. My dad was from Nebraska, and he brought this property to hunt, built a hunting cabin here, but none of us ever lived here. I visited for 50, 60 years, but I decided then to retire here from the University of Minnesota in around 2010. This is an overview of the land that I'm on. It's partly riparian area along the river. In Nebraska, the landowners own the sandbar, although that doesn't have much meaning in terms of taxes. But so my work includes the vegetated sandbar, these series of hills, the wooded draws, and very little cropland. So it's very little of this has ever been plowed. When I moved here, I knew the arts because I taught art. I knew Photoshop. I'm not a photographer. I've never been invested in the technology of photography. And what I especially didn't know, I'm by myself, what I especially didn't know was how to take care of the land. Dad had come out here, but it really was, he had somebody to kind of help him, and I had to learn all over. So my questions when I came here is how do I learn how to take care of the land, things like the weed and cedar control, and then how do I make a life for myself out here, figure out a way to make art about it. So this property, as far as I can tell, is part of the Missouri River BUL. The flow is regulated by the dam, and then this vegetated sandbar, and we rent the pastures for cattle grazing. I think it's also part of the Verdigris Brazil BUL. It's right on the edge if it isn't. So it's a mixed grass prairie, exotic cool season, lots and lots of smooth brome. But I've had a lot of mechanical cutting from an EQIP grant and do a lot of hand cutting myself. I've also had a prescribed burn and a controlled burn by the EQIP grant that the Lynch Fire Department does. And I do rent out my pastures for grazing. So this is looking downriver, Greenwood is over here. My challenge to myself then is how did I learn how to make a life here and how to take care of the place? I turned to local farmers for local knowledge, to understand plants, to understand the weed control especially. But I also turned to the NRCS, Northern Prairie Land Trust, and went to Nebraska Natural Legacy Conferences and had people from Northern Prairie Land Trust and I want to thank you, Kelly Corman and Cassidy Wessel, if you're out there. I also gained knowledge and inspiration from the Nebraska Master Naturalist program, and I am an avid reader of Chris Helzer's blog, The Prairie Enthusiast. And there's other blogs and sources too. I joined the board of Friends of the Missouri National Recreational River to learn more about the river and use various books to identify plants. I don't have a science background. And largely, I began to make art about the land and plants. I love listening about scientific thinking. I love also the artistic thinking, because it's a way to synthesize and understand complex ideas. And I think the previous videos that we saw and emotions bring so many things together. Art often also brings together metaphoric and cultural meanings and reflection. Why do you like this? What does it matter to you? My goals in art as an artist were to learn to see my natural environment, to really see it, to not to be blind to what's around me, to experience delight, to really fall in love with the place, to gain insight about my environment, and then to communicate. And I've had a lot of shows around the state with my work. Most especially in this work I'm going to show you was to honor the inherent beauty and individuality of each plant, and to continue my work in terms of researching the other kinds of information about it. And like what Grace was talking about, the audience is a participant in the artistic process. So everybody brings their own interpretations to a work of art. I'm also putting together a book of 200 plants. So this is a page from it where I do go, although the slides I'm going to show you use common names, and of course those vary. This is including scientific names as well. If anybody sees problems, mistakes, please let me know. And the photographs, and then other information. I call it wildflower prayers, not out of religious connotations as much as I see it as a connection, the plants, the land, a connection to something much larger than myself. And also I see it as, in a sense, a prayer for the continuity of all of this. This is how I call my work photo constructions. I don't just take a photograph. So this would be the photograph I would have taken on kind of a wet day. I digitally cut out everything, almost like drawing, like sculpting, carve out what I don't want. And then I lay it on top of a slide of a photograph of a sky that I took from here. All the plants that I do are from this specific property. So what I'm looking at as an artist are the lines, the shapes, the colors, the values, the textures, and how they come together within the format, in this case, within the rectangle. Together, all of these qualities create a unified composition that hopefully has balance, contrast, variety, some tension, and yet then again a sense of everything belonging together. So a trick that artists often use is to turn something upside down if you really want to see how pieces are working together within your frame, within your format. So by turning something upside down or squinting at it or standing from a distance, you begin to see not something as the object as itself, but all of the parts of the composition. So here I've got this negative, positive space. I've got the lines giving this direction, moving, pushing you out, pushing you in this direction. And then this curve is coming around and drawing your eye back in, and it all gets focused here in the middle, but then it gets pulled around again. And then you've got the contrast of the textures and the smoothness, and the contrast of this purple with the yellows and the oranges, and the greens with the yellow and the oranges. So just one little photograph can become, it almost becomes like a song to me. How do I put these parts together into one piece of music? In some ways, I'm breaking rules, and artists love to break rules, because I'm not using the technology of photographs as much as I'm being creative. But at the same time, I'm trying to keep the quality, the integrity of the plant itself. So what I'd like to show you now are some of the plants. I've got 8 slides that will show you some of the plants, some of the 200 that I have photographed here. This process has gone on since about 2003 of my taking photographs of plants. And gradually I decided to do something with them. As I learned more, so it's a constant process of learning and doing and learning. As I learned more, I began to see the predictability of them in certain lands. I remember, because I was a naive viewer when I first started to do this, extremely naive, I remember seeing a rough gay feather and getting so excited because it was just such a special looking plant. This year, I'm seeing many of them. I'm seeing colonies of them. Unfortunately, I'm seeing also lots of western ragweed. Finding the prickly pear cactus. I thought I'd never see one of these blue-eyed grass again, and this year there's many. So it's a constant process of change, both in the landscape as well as in my seeing. I think that's probably very important. I talk to people out here, farmers and people in town, who actually do not know what they're looking at, don't even see some of these plants. You know, they're not there. It's a kind of plant blindness. Somebody else coined that phrase. So that's some of the plants that I'm seeing in the hills, on the hilltop, and particularly after the prescribed burn or the controlled burn this year, I'm seeing absolutely an abundance of the heath aster. Unfortunately, it's becoming aggressive after the fires. Another plant that I thought I'd never seen again, took me years to identify it, is the pale umbrella wort. And this year there were many of them in very scattered areas. I'm also seeing the riverbank and woodland plants. So I'm about 20 feet above the river, although the riverbank is falling in. Because partly from the water coming down through the draws down through the hills, particularly in 2019, and then also from the very river flow that changes daily, and that also changes depending on the season, and then also changes even on the overall climate. So along the river, there's the perennial south thistle, lots of meadow anemone, wild columbine. I have no idea how they got there. That's part of the storytelling that I would love to know. How is there one little patch of wild columbine down in the middle of the woods? The wild mint, I've only seen one or two examples. All of these tend to grow in the shadows of either the river woods or like the common hops in a very deep draw, or the virgin's bower in a couple of different areas. It's been a joy to in a sense have my eyes wake up to what's around, and that's one of the reasons that I'm doing this work. Another group of plants that I see both in the woody draws, some down by the river, are the shrubs. So there's shrub thickets. Things like the gooseberry is taking over down along the river. Smooth sumac tends to take over, and then some of these are very rare, the buffalo berry, and I was shocked to see the eastern wahoo. I have no idea how it got there. It's along the road. The buckbrush, which is also the bane of my existence. One thing that I need to learn more, and that's why I love listening to all of your presentations, is that there's this tension between the grazing, the pasture management, and wildlife needs of shelter, of food. The chokecherries here, and one delightful plant in the spring is the golden currant that Lewis and Clark found a little bit downriver. So that's one type of plant life that I'm certainly finding in abundance. And then wetland plants. As the previous presentation talked about, some years things are dry, some are wetter, and in 2019 was an abundance of things like the celery foot-leaved crowfoot, and particularly the alkali buttercup, just in the draws. They've disappeared now, or as far as I can see, they have. Along the creeks, the beggar ticks, the burr marigold, American germanders spreading in many different places. So it's and lady's thumb. These are so exciting to me to find when I first did. And now I'm beginning to watch their patterns. On the sandbar, that's a whole different world down there. Most of these plants don't find their way upland. In some cases, that's a good thing, like the common water hemp, the Russian thistle. I'm beginning to see a little bit. The winged pigweed, never seen the hairy golden aster except for 1 year, but the cocklebur is abundant. And the white sweet clover was really abundant this year. It was almost like a forest of white sweet clover. The major yellow flower that's down on the sandbar, the plain sunflower, but those are not common. I've seen a few by the road. And then the sandbar willow. One thing that I noticed, and I think this is where I needed more help, was that after the controlled burn and after all of the cutting, many of these weedy plants came. And it's actually, since I don't have the equipment that many farmers and ranchers might have, it's been quite a problem to deal with the weedy plants. Many of them are introduced plants, and on the disturbed ground from the fires and also from the cutting and also from the land sliding. So that was another development that's just fascinated me and disturbed me as I almost break my leg on it sometimes. So these plants are often abundant. Sometimes they disappear later. Sometimes I do some chemical control of them. And of course, these are more than abundant. So the salt cedar, I think, is controlled. That was out on the sandbar, and I think the Army Corps of Engineers, who manages the river, of course, has sprayed the salt cedar. They spray many of the sandbars that are controlled, restricted for piping plover and least terns, and they did control this salt cedar. But I'm seeing purple loosestrife all along the river, sometimes on the sandbar. Musk thistle, actually less of a problem now. I've been on top of that more. And then the Canada thistle, after the burns, after the burning stacks, it's just been a real problem that I'm trying to stay on top of. But even these plants, 5 minutes?
A couple minutes too.
Thank you. Even these plants have their purposes. I love seeing the butterfly on here and the butterfly on the salt cedar. So, and they certainly have their beauty in their own way, except the Canada thistles. And I find that over the years, I've become, it sometimes disturbs me to walk in the pastures because I see either what I'm doing wrong or that I still need to do. So I'm very excited, even after so many years of taking photographs of plants, to find these unusual sightings. I found just 3 just this summer that I didn't expect to find. I found 4 this summer that I didn't expect to find. Blue lobelia down by the river, Illinois bundleflower on the river, white milkwort, and golden prairie up on the top of a hill. So some of these plants disappear. The slender fumewort, the Venus looking glass, I've never seen again. But I'm always on the lookout to see if something new is coming out and making some brave journey. I can personalize these plants. I want to leave, this is my last slide. I'd like to leave with just thinking about the role of artistic thinking in education, as further discussions about even some of the photographs that you might show, that you might take. How do you help people make connections to those photographs? And other sources can include dance, music. There was music in the last video. Novels can often help people really see. Willa Cather, wonderful descriptions of prairies. The arts are a way to help people see and experience their natural environments, to want to learn about the natural environments, and hopefully to become more proactive. In my own work, in addition to the plants, and this is my way of synthesizing, and I've done many of these as well as the plants. There are photo constructions where I've got 12, 15, sometimes 20 different layers to give a different sense, to turn, in a sense, things upside down so people see them in a slightly different way, and they can journey through these images, walk through them, begin to put themselves into it. The scale has changed, placement changed. They're not realistic in some ways, and yet they're very realistic in others. So I just suggest that you turn to the arts in some ways to augment your work and to help people understand the meaning of your work. Thank you. Thank you for, I'm really pleased to have been invited to be part of this conference.
This was so wonderful. I think I can speak for everyone. This was just a very inspiring and beautiful work. And do you have a website or any way that people can view more of your art, or just through the book?
I put my website, yeah, I don't have the book I have the book put together, but I'm still doing some editing. But my website is here, patjamesart.com.
Wonderful.